month, and we're talking about clay. So, Greg, how did you get interested in working with clay?
Well, that's a long story. My father was a potter. I saw him working with clay. Once in a while, I got to do it too. Played with it in his studio, um, and in high school, I took art classes, did some things with clay. I was more interested in sports than anything, though, in high school. And then in college, when I was a sophomore, I took my first real class in ceramics, and that's when I really started thinking about it seriously. So I was a sophomore at that point, and then so since then it's been about 40 years, I guess, 50 years, that I've been on and off working on it. Went to grad school. I was interested in both writing and ceramics, so I applied to schools that were strong in both of those areas. Ended up getting accepted at University of Montana in writing, but went there and then took ceramics and eventually ended up with an MFA in ceramics. So, and then that's been my main expressive medium since that time.
Now, did you feel like it came naturally, or was it something that you had to work at?
Well, I feel like the interest in it came naturally, and it's such a medium that a lot of people feel is relatively easy for personal expression. But you have to work at it if you want to do things that are special and unique compared to other people. So, I mean, I feel like I worked at it hard, but the interest and the love of it came real easy.
So, what would you say your subject is in majority of your work?
Yeah, well, I've always been interested in both sides of ceramics. So I spend a lot of time making functional things, cups and bowls and plates and planters and other things like that. And but then I also make sculpture. And so over the years I've made fish, been sort of a major subject, and rustic decanters are sort of big, iconic forms of the kind of shapes that the metal shapes that people used to put kerosene and gas and things in. So I make those forms. And I've also made a lot of furniture. I believe it or not.
Out of clay?
Chairs, yep. Chairs, dressers, about 1/3 scale, so about 1/3 the scale of normal size. Mm-hmm. And they become kind of vehicles for expression. The chairs one's made out of bones, for example. They're kind of strange looking pieces of furniture.
So you talked about functional ware that you used to make,
Yeah.
And that you still make, correct?
Yes.
What is functional ware, or what can you tell me about the types of clay?
If you're involved in making functional ware, you're designing and making things that people will use on maybe a daily basis. Mugs, for example, for beverages, and plates that they eat off of, and they'll be part of their lives in a very direct way, and they will perform a specific function. As opposed to sculpture, which I would say has a function. It's an expressive function, and we relate to that work every day, but not in the way that we do to functional ware, where there's a really direct mechanical sort of function.
What advice would you have for somebody that's struggling grasping the concept of working with clay?
Well, it depends what they're struggling with, I guess. I mean, are you thinking of struggling with technique or struggling with...
With just not being able to create something that would be as functional as they'd hope.
Yeah, well, it is a medium with a very steep learning curve at the beginning. So you're working with trying to learn how to use a tool most times called the potter's wheel, and that is like learning to play the piano or learning to play a horn. So initially, you're doing a lot of work for very little return. So people will work and work and work and just have a pile of slip, at the end, or a pile of scrap. And you just have to keep practicing. And so practice and have somebody give you some input and more practice and more input, and gradually you get better. So it's an acquired skill, and people that are going to learn it are going to be persistent. And, some people, if you try it once or twice and say, well, I'm no good at this, you're not going to get there, because it just takes a lot of effort to make it happen. But once you learn it, then it's like playing a violin or playing. You can make beautiful things, you can design unique things, and you never know everything. I mean, so you can keep coming back to it, and you bring new ideas to it, and it gives you ideas, and so once you're kind of over that hump of just sort of understanding basic skills, then you can really go. It becomes a lifetime kind of experience.
Mm-hmm. What would you say is the hardest part about working with clay? Kind of a tough one.
Well, the hardest part, I think just learning those basic skills, is probably the toughest thing. And once you've done that, it's really a lot of fun. I mean, I don't know. You're an artist, and so you know that when you do something well, it's both fun and difficult. And so something makes you go on, and something makes you work harder and harder to try to achieve this thing that you have in your mind. And that's difficult, and it is hard. But, if you like art, something pulls you along. You want to see how this thing's going to come out. You want to see what the final thing's going to look like. And so I would say it's always hard. I think you need to be ready to work hard. Anything that's easy probably isn't going to be too amazing, because everybody does that stuff. So.
Now, something I remember from when I had a class with you was you told me not to get too attached to your artwork or your ceramics pieces before it went in the kiln. Yeah. Why was that?
Well, because there's so many ways of losing a piece. I mean, so many ways of having something disappear before it's finished. And, it could be, I once thought I should write a book about, 1,000 ways of losing a piece. Because you can drop it on the floor, you can pick it up wrong and it breaks, it can be overfired and melt in the kiln. The studio I worked at when I was a student, undergraduate student, had a low ceiling, and once I picked a piece up to look at the bottom and I jammed it into the ceiling. So there's so many ways, and then you just have to say, well, that was important because I learned something from that piece, and the next one's going to be better anyway, and so then you make it again, and you keep going again, because you always will lose things, and that's an important life lesson, I think. Mm-hmm. I think that's really what happens to us in a lot of areas of our lives, really. We lose things, and we learn how to deal with that, and we recover, and we're stronger as a result, and we're better as a result. So I think clay is similar in that way.
Mm-hmm. Now, once you've created a clay piece, how do you add color? Or what is that called when we go to add color to a piece?
It'll be called glazing.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it two ways. You can put slip on a piece, which is a wet clay with coloring in it. You can put that on while it's wet, or you can let it dry, be bisque fired, and then put glaze on it. And glaze has lots of color.
Do you have any favorite glazes that you use?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, over the years we've developed, we have about 14 glazes, I think, right now in the studio that we use, with lots of tiles that show all the different possible combinations. And one of my students developed, Tori Watkins, Watkins Blue, is Watkins Jeans, we call it, yeah. So, yeah, that's a new one. We keep finding new ones. Students keep finding new ones. And
how do they find these new ones?
Well, by testing. So in any good kiln, you have a lot of your work that's being fired with glazes on it, but you also have a lot of clay tests, little test tiles. So you can see, you have this sort of library of possibilities and all these possible things that you could do. And some of the glazes are ugly when you test them, but they may be good for, maybe they come out all bubbly and stuff, and they're not good for a functional piece, but they could be good for like alligator skin or something like that. I mean, or like these rustic decanters that I make. The glazes, in a way, the worse the glazes come out, the better they are, because they're supposed to look like old, rusty, sort of beat up cans. And so those are not the kinds of glazes I would put on functional wear, but on those old cans, they look great. So if you have all this sort of file of possibilities, you can, refer to those and use them. And, in my setting, advanced students are required to do that. Test a certain number of glazes and develop some of their own. So that's where a lot of our glazes have come from over the years.
And last, what would you say is the best lesson that you've learned just with working with clay?
The best lesson, probably what I shared with you already. I mean, just the best life lesson is that you have to keep coming back. I mean, you lose things in life. I mean, you'll put all of your energy into a piece, and it doesn't come out the way you'd hoped, or it cracks in the firing, or then you sort of let down when you have to glue it back together, or something like that. But you're always losing the best thing you ever made, and that makes sense because as you work, you're going up this continuum and getting better and better and better. So if you lose something, it's usually the best thing you ever made. And so you go, this is the best thing I've ever made. But you learn after that happens a few times that okay, it was the best thing I ever made, but really the next thing is the best thing I've ever made. I ever will make. And the piece you lost contributes to the work that you'll do in the future. I mean, it's what you learned in making the piece that's important, and not so much the piece itself. There's no. Well, I was going to say you probably aren't going to make the Mona Lisa, or you're not going to make anything that's going to bring that kind of fame and attention. So it's not. You shouldn't feel that anything is that precious. That if you lose it, you're going to stop making things, or it's going to just kill you as an artist. I mean, you just sort of take a breath and go again and keep making things. So that takes a while to learn. It's hard. It's hard to lose stuff. It's hard to put effort. I mean, I have students. Beginning students will say, "I worked a half an hour on that piece."
I was one of them. Threw it off the wheel.
They lose something. They spend a half an hour, and I've had the experience of working a month on a piece and breaking it when I carried it out the door. Hit the tail of a big fish on the door frame, and it fell and broke on the floor. And and I've lost things. Have been broken in shipping. I had a whole car full of pots once that I was taking to the school to fire at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I just decided I'd fill the tank with gas. It wasn't very smart, but I wasn't thinking that it would be a problem. I pulled into the gas station. And as I was paying for the gas, a woman came in and she said, "I'm sorry, sir, but I hit your car."